The tall iron gate of the orphanage loomed dark and unwelcoming. Inside the walls were grey and cracked. The old cold and heavy air. It was no place for laughter or joy. And for Ben and Isaac, it felt like a prison. Their world had already turned upside down when they lost their parents in a terrible car accident, leaving them with no one to turn to. Now they were here in Miss Agatha's orphanage. Miss Agatha, the head of the orphanage, was a stern woman with sharp eyes and a voice that sounded like nails scratching against metal. She was strict and frightening, her face set in a permanent scowl. She didn't like children, and she especially didn't like Ben and Isaac. From the moment they arrived, Miss Agatha seemed to have something against them. She often called them troublemakers and claimed that they didn't belong here. Ben, who was 10 years old, sensed her hatred. He knew he had to protect his little brother Isaac, who was only 8, from her cruel ways. Isaac was gentle and sweet, the kind of boy who would make anyone smile. But Miss Agatha wasn't anyone. She was a hard, angry woman with a heart that seemed made of stone. Their first night was a nightmare. Miss Agatha had lined up all the boys in cold hallway and shouted out strict rules. No talking after light out, no wandering around, and if anyone disobeys, they will be punished. Ben held Isaac's hand tightly as Miss Agatha glared down at each of them. Miss Agatha had favorites, and Ben and Isaac quickly learned who they were. James and Leonard, two older boys with staring faces and cruel eyes, had Miss Agatha wrapped around their fingers. They did whatever they wanted, and Miss Agatha never punished them. They had everything: extra food, warmer blankets, and even nicer clothes. But if Ben and Isaac asked for anything, Miss Agatha's response was always a sharp no. Ben tried his best to make Isaac feel safe, though he felt scared himself. Every day seemed to get worse. The food was terrible: cold, hard bread and watery soup. But Ben would always give Isaac a little more to make sure his brother didn't go hungry. He didn't have any toys, books, or games. All they had were each other. Things got even harder when James and Leonard started to bully them. One evening, as Ben and Isaac sat together in a corner in the courtyard, James and Leonard strode to them with smug face. Well, well, look at the little babies, James sneered. I bet you wish you had nice things like us. Ben stood up and put himself between Isaac and the bullies. Leave us alone, he said, trying to sound braver than he felt. But James only laughed. Or what? You will tell Miss Agatha? Go ahead, she won't believe you. Ben clenched his fists, but he knew James was right. Miss Agatha would never listen to them. She didn't care about them at all. The bullying continued, and every time something went wrong, like a broken window or missing food, James and Leonard would blame it on Isaac and Ben. And every time, Miss Agatha would punish the brothers. Sometimes she would make them scrub the floors with their hands and kneel until their arms ached. Other times, she would deny them dinner, making them to go to bed hungry. One day, James and Leonard did something especially mean. They waited until Ben and Isaac were about to eat the small portion they had been given. And just as the brothers were about to take their first bite, James knocked the plate out of their hands, spilling the food all over the ground. Oops, James said with a smirk. Looks like you don't get dinner tonight. Isaac's eye filled with tears and he looked at Ben, his face sad and confused. Ben's heart broke. He hated seeing his little brother suffer, and he hated that he couldn't stop it. But he put his arm around Isaac and whispered, It's okay, we'll be okay. That night, they tried to explain to Miss Agatha what had happened. They told her that James and Leonard had knocked their food away, but she didn't believe them. Lies, she snapped. You're just trying to cause trouble. Boys like you should be grateful you're even here. Ben wanted to hear, wanted to tell her how unfair she was, but he knew it would only make things worse. Him and Isaac were trapped, stuck in a place where no one cared about them. and no one will help them. One day, a kind woman came to visit the orphanage, looking to adopt a child. She seemed warm and friendly, and when she spotted Ben and Isaac, her face softened. She walked over and smiled at them, and for a brief moment, they felt hope. But Miss Agatha quickly stepped in. These two, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Oh, they're nothing but trouble. They wouldn't make good children for anyone. The woman looked confused, glancing at Ben and Isaac, who were staring at the floor. She didn't say anything more, but they saw her disappointment. And once she left, Miss Agatha turned her anger on them. Don't you dare try to make yourself look good, she hissed. No one wants troublemakers like you. Ben felt the weight of Miss Agatha's hatred pressing down on him, but he was determined not to let her break him. He looked at Isaac, who was barely holding back tears, and whispered, one day we will get out of here, I promise. Isaac nodded, clutching his brother's hand, finding strength in Ben's word. The brothers knew that they would have to rely on each other to survive this place. And even though Miss Agatha's cruelty felt endless, they held onto a silver of hope that someday they will be free from her iron grip. One morning, after another sleepless night, Miss Agatha called Ben into her office. The room was dark and stuffy, with heavy curtains that blocked out the sunlight. Miss Agatha sat behind her desk, her sharp eyes narrowed as she looked at him up and down. I've had enough of your nonsense, she snapped. If I hear even one more complaint about you, you will regret it. Ben didn't say anything. He stood still, clenching his fist, feeling both fear and anger boiling inside of him. He wanted to shout, to tell her how unfair she was, but he knew it would only make things worse. So you think you're so tough, don't you? Miss Agatha continued, her voice dripping with disdain. But you're nothing. No one wants a boy like you. You will never find a family willing to take you in. Ben's heart sank. He had always hoped that someday someone would come and take him and Isaac away from this place. But Miss Agatha's word made him feel as though they would never come. One evening, when Ben was outside scrubbing the stone steps, James strutted over, followed by Leonard and two other boys. They grinned at each other, clearly planning something. Hey, scrub boy, James sneered, kicking over Ben's bucket of water. Miss Agatha says you're not scrubbing hard enough. Ben gritted his teeth and kept his head down, scrubbing harder. He knew better than to say nothing back. Look at you, Leonard said with a laugh. Think he's so brave? Then, without warning, James shoved Ben, making him fall face first on the step. Ben's hand scrubbed against the rough stone, and he whined in pain. Isaac, who had been sweeping nearby, saw what had happened and rushed over. Leave him alone, Isaac shouted, his face red with anger. James laughed. Oh, look, the little baby wants to protect his big brother. The two boys laughed as well, mocking Isaac, but Isaac didn't look down. He stood beside Ben, his small frame tense and ready to fight if he had to. Ben felt a surge of pride for his little brother's bravery, but he also felt a pang of guilt. Isaac shouldn't have to deal with this. He should be living a happy, safe life, not trapped in a place where they were bullied every day. Later that day, the brothers tried to tell Miss Agatha what James and Leonard had done. They explained how the bullies had knocked over the bucket and shoved Ben. But Miss Agatha just shook her head, her expression cold and unfeeling. I'm tired of your lies, she said, folding her arms. You're only trying to cause trouble because you don't want to do your chores. James and Leonard would never do such things. Ben's heart sank. He wanted to scream that she was wrong, that James and Leonard were the real troublemakers. But he knew it was useless. Miss Agatha would never listen to him or believe him. The two brothers grew more desperate by the day. They knew that if they stayed here, their lives would only become more miserable. One night, after the lights were turned off, Ben whispered to Isaac in the dark. We can't stay here anymore, he said, his voice barely audible. We have to find a way out. Isaac's eyes widened. You mean escape? Ben nodded. Yes, it's the only way we'll ever be free from Miss Agatha and the bullies. Isaac hesitated, fear flickering in his eye. But he trusted his big brother. Ben had always protected him, and if Ben thought escaping was the only way, then he believed him. The next day, as they walked in the garden, the brothers started to make their plans. They would wait until everyone was asleep, then slip out of the orphanage and run as far as they could. Ben was determined to protect Isaac no matter what. He knew it would be dangerous, but he couldn't stand to see his little brother suffer anymore. Miss Agatha was more cunning than they realized. She had noticed the whispers between them, the quick glances, the way they seemed to be planning something. Miss Agatha asked James and Leonard to put some eyes on the brothers, and they soon discovered the brothers were planning on escaping that night. Miss Agatha, after getting the information, shouted the brother's name, and they all ran to her. I heard you're planning to leave this orphanage. How dare you? Without a warning, she used the baseball bat in her hand to hit Ben at the back. Ben screamed in pain and passed out. Miss Agatha asked the boys to carry him to the bunk bed. She told them that he will be fine. Isaac joined the boys in carrying his big brother while crying. Isaac felt helpless, unable to do anything to save his brother. He cried himself to sleep, clutching the tiny blanket and wishing he could make everything right. The next morning, Ben woke up. Isaac ran to him, crying, I thought you left me too, just like mom and dad. Ben said weakly, Never. I promise never to leave you. With that, the brothers hugged each other. The following week that came, Miss Agatha made it clear that she would make sure both brothers are not adopted by the same parents. Ben will not bear the thought of losing his brother, and he had promised him that he will never leave, so he brought up the escape plan again. One afternoon, while the brothers walked in the garden, Isaac whispered to Ben, We have to get out here, Ben. We can't let her split us up. Ben nodded, his jaw clenched. I won't let her, Isaac. I promise we'll escape this time. We won't get caught. The boys began to work out a plan, one even more careful than before. They watched the routines of the orphanage, paying attention to when Miss Agatha and her favorites would leave the hall unattended. They studied the building's creaky floorboard, the doors that squeaked, and the windows that rattled, figuring out the easiest way to leave. But as they planned, Miss Agatha's cruelty continued. She assigned them to more difficult chores. Finally, the night arrived. The orphanage was silent and the dim hallway echoed with the sound of creaking floorboard as the boys carefully tiptoed towards the storage room. Ben led the way, holding Isaac's hand to keep him steady. Every small sound made their heart pound, but they didn't turn back. They reached the storage room and found the loose window latched just as Ben had remembered. With trembling hands, Ben ripped it open. They squeezed through the narrow window one after the other, careful not to make a sound. The boys made their way to the fence, adrenaline pushing them forward. Ben helped Isaac climb up first, boosting him to the top of the fence. Isaac scrambled over and landed softly on the other side, looking back at Ben with wide eyes. Just as Ben was about to climb, they heard the unmistakable sound of Miss Agatha's voice. Where do you think you're going? She shrieked, her voice cutting through the night like a knife. Ben froze, his heart hammering in the chest. He looked back to see Miss Agatha standing at the orphanage door, her face twisted in fury. Without a second's scream, he scrambled up the fence, desperate to get to Isaac, but before he could make it over, Miss Agatha grabbed his leg, yanking him down. Let me go, Ben shouted, kicking her, trying to break free. Isaac, from the side of the fence, screamed, Ben, Ben! Miss Agatha tightened her grip. You think you can just run away from me? You belong here, Ben. You're not going anywhere. Miss Agatha glared at Isaac. You may have escaped, but your brother is mine. I'll make sure he never leaves. Isaac took one last heart-wrenching look at Ben before he turned and ran, his small figure disappearing into the night. Miss Agatha dragged Ben into the orphanage, her grip like iron. She forced him into the basement, slamming the door shut and locking it. He was alone in darkness once more, but this time his heart felt shattered. His brother was gone, and he had failed to protect him. For days, Ben remained locked in the basement, weak and hungry, tormented by the knowledge that Isaac had escaped, but that he had been left behind. As he lay in darkness, he thought about Isaac, imagining how safe he was. Miss Agatha only came down once a day to give him the smallest morsel of food, barely enough to keep him alive. You thought you were clever, didn't you? She would say, but her voice dripping with satisfaction. But no one gets away from me. Ben was weak, his spirit battered. But he clung to a faint glimmer of hope. He believed Isaac had found his way to safety, to a place far from Miss Agatha's cruelty. This thought gave him strength, even in the darkest moment. Finally, after they felt what felt like forever, Miss Agatha unlocked the basement door and pulled him out, forcing him back to orphanage main hall. Ben was exhausted and frail, but he stood tall, his eyes burning with defiance. You will never leave here, Ben, she said. You are mine until someone else decides to take you. But no one will want a troublemaker like you. Over the next few days, Ben returned to his old chores, though he was a shell of his former self. Then one morning, Miss Agatha's voice echoed through the hall, summoning Ben to the front door. His heart skipped a beat, wondering what new punishment awaited him. But as he walked into the office, he was met with a surprise. There stood a wealthy couple dressed in fine clothes, their faces soft and kind. They looked at Ben with sympathy and curiosity, their eyes filled with an emotion Ben had almost forgotten. Miss Agatha plastered on a fake smile. She introduced him. This is Ben, one of our older children, she said with forced politeness. He's been here for a long time. The couple exchanged a look. Then the woman knelt to Ben's level, her eyes full of kindness. Hello, Ben. I am Mrs. Ade, and this is my husband, Mr. Ade. We've heard about you and wanted to meet you ourselves. Ben looked at them. Hello, ma, he said. Mr. Day put a gentle hand on Ben's shoulder. We know you've been through a lot. We are here to take and make things better for you. Ben's heart shaping. Was it possible? Could he finally escape from Miss Agatha's clutches? As they walked out of the orphanage gate, Ben looked one last look at the grim building that had held him captive for so long. The car ride with their days was quiet. They tried to make small talk, but Ben's mind was elsewhere. He stared out of the window, watching the street of Lagos pass by. The city was alive, bustling, but for Ben, it all felt distant, as though he was watching someone else's life unfold. They arrived at Ade's home, a large, beautiful house with gardens and warm lights glowing from the window. It was a world Ben had never known, filled with kindness and comfort, but none of it would fill the emptiness left by Isaac's absence. The Ades welcomed him with open hands, showing him to his own room with a bed. They offered him more food than he had seen in years, clothes that actually fit. But each night, as he laid in the comfortable bed, he would think of Isaac. In the days that followed, the Ades tried to help Ben adjust to his new life. They enrolled him in a nearby school, brought him books, and gave him toys. They were kind to him. Yet Ben struggled to feel at home. Each time he saw a younger child, he thought of Isaac. One day, Mr. Day found him sitting alone. His face etched with sadness. Ben, she said, I know you've been through a lot, but we are here for you. Ben answered, thank you, but there's nothing you can do. 20 years passed like a blob. Ben, once a broken boy, was now a man shaped by hardship and unforgiving street of Lagos. He had left their days home in his teenage years, driven by a relentless spirit and the haunting memory of his brother Isaac. Life in the street was ruthless, and Ben had no choice but to survive. He joined a gang for protection, doing whatever it took to make it through each day. He became tough, street smart, and untrusting.